Alright, for this video I'm going to show you how to do all-around firing. All-around firing is the projectiles start at the center of the enemy and come all the way around so that they expand all the way out. And these would be great for bosses, if you want to put them into your end boss. You don't need to see my emails. And we can also adjust these splits so that they can even be more. For example, I can do a 25 split, for example, and they will come out with a lot more projectiles that come all around. And so this would be great for a boss fight. So I would have to dodge all these projectiles. You see these in a lot of these 2D games, these 2D shooter games where the bosses have these projectiles that come out like this. I can even set it up so that it instantiates so that there's a delay that comes all around. Maybe I can even add that to all around firing, like do a delay so that they're not always coming out at the same time. In any event, I can change my projectile speed to be 0, and I can even change the rotation. For example, if I want the rotation to be 90, then the lasers come out looking like that, or if I want to change the rotation to 45, the lasers will actually come out looking like that. Looks pretty cool, and now let's just dig into the code and see how we make this happen. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need is you're going to need an enemy. Obviously, we need an enemy to attach all of this to, and you're going to need the all-around firing script, which you can download from the description below. And you're going to need to make that a script inside of your Unity project. I have it here as an all-around firing C# script. And you should have your enemy prefabbed, and you should have your laser prefabbed. So what can we do next? So in my enemy prefab, I also have an enemy script. Now you'll notice that I don't have an enemy all-around firing in here. That's because I should probably just go to my blue here and do a apply to my prefab, so that now I should have my all-around firing script in there. Excellent. So now I have my all-around firing script in my prefab, and that's going to help my player do all-around firing, but it's not going to all-around fire unless I tell it to. And you do that by creating some kind of a script that's going to control your enemy or your firing. It doesn't matter what script you put this into, as long as you put it somewhere. And I chose to put it into a script called enemy, and inside of that enemy I'm going to have an all-around firing serialized Boolean field that I can either check or uncheck depending on whether or not I want my enemy to be firing all around. I can have different bools here. For example, maybe I want to have my enemy do a follow around. I have a script for that as well. Maybe I can share that if people are interested, where the enemy will follow you all around the screen until it has either been destroyed or you have been destroyed. I have another script that basically does a kamikaze. I think it comes here and then it just kind of comes right after you pretty quick. Another one that comes down like to here, stops there for a while, and comes back up and shoots back up again. You know, plenty of scripts that kind of do that. I can always show those to people if people are interested. But let's get to the nitty-gritty here. Let's go to my enemy script and let's find out how this works. Again, I have my serialized field for all-around firing, and I have a shot clock. You can choose to use coroutines if you want. I'm choosing to use a shot clock in this case, just personal opinion. So I initialize my shot clock to be a value between 0.5 and 3 seconds. I then increment or decrement my shot clock based on the frame-independent value of time delta time. Time delta time, again, is the time it takes to get from one frame to the next frame. So on slower machines, this value will not be, the value will be different, but it will be different based on the time that it takes, not how quickly the frames go. So if I did this based on a frame rate, the shot clock would go way fast on fast machines and way too slow on slow machines. The time delta time takes us away from that and just says, look, no matter how long it took to get from one frame to another, just subtract that from the shot clock and go from there. Once my shot clock is actually 0 or less than 0, and I have all-around firing, you're going to call this method all-around fire, or fire all around. You're going to call it from the get component all-around firing script. So to get the all-around firing, you can just do a get component because it's a part of my enemy, right? I have that as a component, so I will just call that component get all-around firing. Call the method fire all around, reinitialize my shot clock, and the process repeats. And that's all you really need to do to have all-around firing work in your program. But how does all-around firing really work? I'm pretty sure you're curious about the logistics of this all-around firing. Well, first of all, I need my rotations. And why do I need my rotations? Well, I need my rotations because I need to know where I need to put my projectiles. So I need my rotations, and think of my enemy as this circle. I need my rotation for 0, and based on my splits, let's say I have 8 splits, then I need to have 8 rotations perfectly differentiated, or I should say perfect intervals are on my circle. And how would I know what my intervals are? Well, if I want to split my circle into 8 equal parts, then I need to take the complete circumference of my circle and then divide that by 8, and that's going to be equal to 45. If I wanted to split it into 10 equal parts, then I would divide it by 10 and get 36, and so on and so on. So obviously the more splits that I have, the less my the interval will be. And so I pass the number of splits into get rotations. I create a list of floats. I do that because I want dynamic list creation. Initialize that to a new list, so I have a new list that I can create. Take my splits and divide by 360 divided by the number of splits that I have, round that up, make sure it's an integer, and put that into my rotation as my rotation interval or my rotation increment value. It's not necessarily the rotation, it's just a rotation increment value. I start at rotation 0 and I add that to my rotations list. I then increment by my rotation increment value, which if it's my splits were 8, it's 45. I then add that, or that's my new rotation, my new I, so that gets added to my rotations. Again, at 8, it's going to be 90, and then so on and so on and so on. If my rotations, if my splits was 10, then my rotation would have been 36. So my first rotation would always be 0, and then my second rotation would be 36, and then I believe the next one would be 72, and so on until I get all of my rotations. Next, I need to get my Euler positions, and this is where things get a little tough, but it's not tough in general in terms of coding it, it's just tough in general in terms of realizing what you need to do with it. With a Euler position, we need to start creating objects of quaternion. What is a quaternion? Well, a quaternion is beyond the discussion of this lecture. I'm simply not going to go into it, one, because I don't understand quaternions in general. It's higher level math, uses complex numbers, and you really don't need to know what a quaternion is to do this stuff in Unity. In Unity, a quaternion, as far as you and I know, is just a way to rotate my object in space. And in this case, it's two-dimensional space, so I really only need to rotate it in one direction, which is really nice, and that's the Z direction. And how do I know that I need to rotate it in the Z direction? Well, I know that because if I were to go into my prefab and put my enemy laser in here, like so, and I go to my rotation and I start rotating around the x-axis, you'll see that it's rotating towards me, not really where I want that to go. So if I rotate it around the y-axis, you'll see that it's rotating it around that axis there. It looks like it was starting to rotate, but that's not true. So let me set that to 0, let me set that to 0, and if I now rotate it around the z-axis, you'll see that it actually does do the rotation that I want it to do. That's the rotation that I want. I want it to rotate around the z-axis. So we will let it rotate around that z-axis. So I don't need, actually let me leave that on there because I am going to need that for a later example. So I don't need to rotate it around the x-axis. I don't need to rotate it around the z-axis, but I'm skipping a step here. In order for me to create a proper Euler value, I cannot just put a value in here willy-nilly. It's better for you because, look, it takes, with instantiate, it takes a quaternion value. So we need to create a quaternion value to put into my Euler, to put into this third parameter. To create a quaternion value, I use the quaternion object and I use the Euler property, the Euler method here. And I pass into parameters, no 0 for x, 0 for y, and then my rotation value at rotation I, which in this case would be 0 at first iteration, and then my additional rotation. So now we get into my additional rotation. What kind of additional rotation are we talking about here? Well, going back to my laser, it's at position 0. This is a rotation 0, and it's at position 0. Because this is basically, if I were to put this near my enemy, let me just drag my enemy back down here underneath it. The laser is positioned at rotation 0. This is where I need to have my laser be at rotation 0. When it goes to location 1, it's going to be in this direction. Location number 2 is going to be in that direction, and so on and so on and so on. I have another sprite here, and it's like a fire projectile. If I moved this projectile into projectile position 0 at its current rotation, it's going to be projected as this. And that's incorrect. I don't want this to be going in this direction, looking like that in that rotation. That's not exactly the way it's supposed to be. It's actually supposed to be rotated. And what's my rotation supposed to be? Well, it's actually 270. If I rotate that around 200, actually it's not even 270, it's going to be 90 if I'm not mistaken. There it is. That's the correct position for it to be rotated around, and if I move it up, that's the exact rotation that I want it to be. So I want it to be at position 90 when it's rotated. But the problem is that this sprite is already rotated at a specific position. It's already rotated at 90 degrees, which means for me to get to a rotation of 0 based on this, I need to additionally rotate it. And I need to additionally rotate it by 270 for me to get to position rotation 0. Hopefully you were able to keep track of that and understand that. Again, my sprite is at a default position rotation of 90. I want to rotate it to this position, which means I need to add 270 to get it to rotation 0, and that's going to push it up here. So that is why we have an additional rotation. These are for just in case we have sprites that are not automatically in the right position when we instantiate them. We add an additional rotation so that that rotation is in fact correct. Then we can create my Euler method, and then I add that to my Euler list, and then I return my Eulers, and we're good. And so now I have a list of floats based on my rotations, and now I have a list of quaternions that are that have a quaternion value that I can stick into my instantiation method. So now I have all of my Eulers based on my rotation. So this is a very important line right here to get. The next thing I need to get are my velocities, and because I need to know where I'm pushing this this laser. I mean, for example, if I just push the laser normally and it instantiates right here, well, it's just going to get pushed down. In fact, if it's all of my instantiated objects that are here are going to get pushed down, and they're going to be pushed on at different rotations. And that's not what I want. I actually want this spawn to be pushed up in that direction. Then what I'm going to do is if I have it rotated in that direction, then obviously it's going to be pushed in this direction, right? I want it to be pushed in that direction, not to be pushed in this direction or this direction going down. I want it to be going in the direction that it needs to be going into. And we do that in the following way. I call my get velocities all around, and I really don't need to know the splits because I don't know why I have that in there. As you can see, I don't have anything in there for splits. So I really don't need this parameter. It's in there for no reason, but I do need the rotations. The rotations, again, I need to increment through them. I need to create, again, a list of velocities. This time they are a vector 2 because that's going to be what I'm going to be putting into my velocity for my rigid body 2. They takes a vector 2. So why not just create my velocities as vector 2 right off the bat? I then create a arbitrary point in space. This is the point that I want to move towards, and the further away the better. And I can show this to you in an example when I get to it. And then I'm going to create an offset value, so I'm going to put that as my vector 3. And don't worry, we're going to create a vector 2 out of this eventually. So then I start at my rotation 0, and then I'm going to start using some trig here. I'm not going to get into this trig, but I'm going to basically show you what this means. What I need to do is the following. I have a place that I'm going to in general. I have an origin position here, and I have a position that I want to go to in general. And what I need to do is I need to figure out what my x offset is going to be, and then I need to figure out what my y offset is going to be, and so that when I put them together, I will have a vector direction that is correct, that goes in that direction. To do that, to get my x direction here, I need to basically take my rotation at that index, get the radian value of that. This is just a global value that gets my radians, and then I find the sine of that value, multiply that by my arbitrary point in space 35. This just increases the line so that it's not so small. If I didn't multiply it by c, my vector would probably be like this big. It would be pretty, it wouldn't be all that big. So I increase the value so that I can have a much greater distance and a much better value, so that I can get a much more I guess what the word I'm looking for is that I get a more accurate position, I get a more accurate offset. The further away, the better the angle of direction. So that way I just get a much better accuracy with my angle of direction, which is kind of what I'm looking at. I do the same thing with my cosine. So my cosine is gonna, if I do the same thing and doing it with my y value, I should say, I do the same thing, but this time with the cosine. So I get my x value and then I get my y value. And so then what I need to do is I need to take the position of my enemy, which is, or the position of the, the position of the enemy in itself. So that's going to be where I'm at currently. So my enemy is located here. And I need to get the vector position that is x plus my offset of x, which is going to be in that direction. And then I want to get the vector for my y position. And so my x, y position is actually going to be right there. Or in this case, so my enemy is located here, my x and then my y position vector is going to be right up there. And then I don't need to mess with my 0. You'll see that I'm doing a subtraction y. I can't exactly remember why I'm doing that, but I do believe that if I take a cosine of this value, that it actually can be represented in a negative value. And I'm thinking the reason because this value goes between negative 90 and 90, and if I'm not mistaken with that, which is why when we get to a certain value, when it becomes negative, creating this as subtracting that is actually going to give me the right answer. I believe that's the case. Please somebody correct me if I'm wrong about that. It's been so long since I've done trigonometry, I really don't quite remember it, but I believe cosine is between negative 90 and 90, and sine is between 0 and 180, which is why we can add here, but we need to subtract here in order to get the proper value. We don't want negative vectors, we want positive vectors. And that becomes my new offset. That's where I want the velocity to move towards. So I take that new offset, subtract it from the transform position, so this gives me my vector direction. I normalize that between 0 and 1, and then apply my projectile speed. If I didn't normalize it, that thing would shoot off faster than a bolt of lightning. It would go really fast. I need to normalize that between 0 and 1, and then I have my projectile speed added to that. Hopefully the normalization is not 0. Probably going to be, somewhere in the middle. I'm not quite too sure exactly where it is. I can always run a debug to see where it normalizes to. Then I add that. Then I have my move direction. Then I set my move direction to my velocity, and that's it. I just return my list of velocities. And so now I can instantiate my object, my laser prefab, at my enemy's location with the Euler rotation direction, and then push that projectile in the direction based on the velocity that I calculated. And that's really all there is to it. There's really nothing more to it than that. And so that will create all of your projectiles to go in the correct direction, and projectiles that have a distinct head and a tail. If you need them to have a very distinct direction, you can move them in that direction as well. A couple of things that would be great to have in terms of additions to All-Around Firing, I would love to see these. I probably will work on them on my own. Would be to have a delay, kind of what we see in certain video games, I think 1945, one of the bad guys has a delay where the all-around firing starts and then it kind of spirals out instead of all comes out at the same time. Or perhaps maybe different speeds. It comes out slow, maybe it comes out and then it starts to increase its velocity as it goes further and further out. Many different things. Also, another interesting thing that could be done is perhaps I want to have my all-around firing also give me 3 projectiles coming out the front, and I can use all-around firing to say, look, have these 3 projectiles be visible, but all the rest of my projectiles be hidden. And that could basically give you a projectile where the enemy fires 3 projectiles down in a sort of both of them are at a 45-degree angle, and the other one is at a 0 angle or something similar. Or a 5-directional firing for the enemy. You could manipulate all-around firing to do, in fact, those things as well. That's it. I'm at 20 minutes. I don't want this to be any longer than that. I'm hoping that I, made this a lot more quick in terms of, getting through this. And if you have any suggestions, please let me know. If you have any corrections, again, please let me know, and I can cut that into the video or I can put that into the description. The code is in the description below. Please leave a like. Any feedback, I would be glad to hear any of it. Thank you again.